Dust clawed the sky as Garrick Hayes crouched beside his failing mare, nostrils burning with grit. The sandstorm raged like something alive, swallowing the horizon in a haze of bone-white fury. Garrick pressed a hand to horse's flank, feeling its last breath shudder beneath sweat-streaked hide. Beyond the corral's cedar rails, wind-whipped dunes drifted into dunes. Then a faint cry, helpless and human, cut through the storm's roar. Garrick straightened, oil lantern in hand, and stepped into the teeth of the gale. No man could ignore a plea at the edge of death. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something extra special saved just for you. He forged through writhing clouds of sand, each bootfall traced in dusty furrows. The cry came again, closer now, 5 voices ragged with thirst. Garrick's heart thundered beneath his battered coat. He reached a shallow wash and found a group huddled against the storm. A tall girl, arms folded protectively. A stoic boy with mud-caked boots. A smaller girl clutching a ragged shawl. And twin toddlers, faces buried in each other's sleeves. Sand crusted their hair and clothes. Lips cracked like parched clay. Garrick knelt, offering his lantern's glow and a long gulp of water. They drank in savage gulps, eyes bright with desperate hope. He scooped the youngest twins into his arms, pressing blankets from his wagon across their shoulders. The storm clawed his back, but he carried them toward the barn, the only shelter within miles. Behind him, the older children followed, feet stumbling through churned sand. In the barn's lee, Garrick lowered each child onto fresh straw and draped oilcloth over broken windows. Lanterns flickered against rough beams. He set down a cracked enamel pail filled from his canteen, voice low as cedar incense. Water. Drink. The girl of 14 bent first, cupping water in trembling hands. The boy of 12 knelt next, muscles taut beneath skin. The smaller girl knelt, clutching the pail's rim. Garrick watched their gaunt faces in lantern light. Memories stirred. A home once filled with laughter, now silent as a grave. His wife's laughter, her slender hand on a child's cheek. Gone these 5 years. He pressed his thumb to quiet ache in his chest and turned to the twins, one already asleep, low, soaked in exhaustion. The older children drifted to the loft, where he'd stacked blankets and quilts. He set the satchel by the ladder, his wife stitching on display, floral patterns worn thin. "Use these," he said, voice catching. "Safe now. I'm Garrick Hayes." Their eyes, cautious as colt eyes, flicked to his face and back to quilt. Inside the cabin single room, Garrick stoked embers beneath a cast-iron pot. The aroma of salted beef and root vegetables filled the air. He retrieved a tin cup of broth and returned to the barn entrance, where the children crouched on blankets like lost birds. The girl offered him a distant nod. The boy stared at his boots. The younger girl wiped tears on sand-smudged sleeves. He passed around cups of steaming broth. Soft sips, quiet gulps. Each child warmed from within. Hunger coiled into slow comfort. Garrick watched Levi, the 8-year-old, press broth to his lips with chubby fingers, eyes bright with fragility and trust. Night deepened as the storm eased to a whisper. Garrick led the children into the cabin, each in turn, from oldest to youngest, carefully guiding them onto bunks of straw and quilts. He tucked the twins together, head pads winged with care. The smaller girl curled beneath her own quilt. The boy of 12 lay stiff as a log, eyes never closing. The girl of 14 lingered by the hearth, satchel clutched to her chest. Garrick offered each a sip of water, voice quiet as drifting dust. Rest. Safe here. He closed the door against night's breath and latched it with firm resolve. In the cabin's lantern glow, Garrick scanned their faces, etched by hunger, grief, fear. He set a chipped watch on the table, its hands frozen at sunrise. He'd carried it since the day his own child might have been born and never arrived. He touched its cracked crystal, memory slicing through years, laughed of a child he never held, promise left unfulfilled. Now, these 5 needed him to be father and mother both. He drew a deep breath and gathered each into a gentle embrace. "You're safe," he whispered, "to dawn and beyond." Behind the cabin, footprints in churned mud marred the ridge road. Garrick's gaze flicked to moonlit dunes, where tracks trailed into dunes beyond. A lone figure paused at the faint glow of lanterns, silhouette rigid against drifting sand. Garrick felt the stir of wind in his bones. Threat riding the ridge. He stepped to the window, peering through glass streaked with grit. The silhouette faded into horizon's haze. Garrick's jaw tightened. He turned back to the children, soft breaths filling the room, each trusting heart pulsing in fragile peace. A sudden rap cracked the door, sharp as gunfire. Garrick's hand slipped to the pistol at his hip as he moved across the floor. The children stirred on their bunks, eyes blinking into lantern light. Garrick opened the door a crack. Moonlight splashed across the porch, revealing Deputy Sheriff Malachi Price, badge glinting beneath brim. Sand dusted his coat, boots caked in churned earth. He tipped his hat. "Hayes," Price said, voice low as wind in sagebrush. Words out. Children found. Kim may come calling. He stepped inside, eyes flicking the huddled forms. "You holding them?" Garrick closed the door against the night. "They're safe," he said. He met Price's gaze, sand and sheriff's duty, and man's promise mingling in moonlight. Price nodded once. "I'll keep watch." He gestured to the lantern glow. "If Ken appear, I'll send him here." Garrick laid a steady hand on Price's shoulder. "No one leaves until peace finds them." Outside, wind sighed through cedar rails, carrying echoes of riders yet to come. Garrick gazed at his new family. 5 small faces turned toward him in hope and whispered his vow, "Here you will live." Levi's scream shattered Garrick's restless sleep, lantern flickering against cedar walls. He bolted upright on his bunk, heart hammering like horses on the plain. Dust from yesterday's storm still clung to every board, and the children's whimpers tumbled through the cabin's narrow halls. Garrick yanked the lantern from its hook and raced toward the bunkhouse, the beam slicing through shadows like a knife. No man could ignore a child in terror. Inside, he found Levi trembling beneath Clara's quilts, tears carving tracks through dust on her cheeks. The twins, Ruth and Rachel, huddled behind her, silent as storm-tossed leaves. Amos knelt at the foot bunk, rifle resting across his knees, face grim with vigil. Clara's tall frame curved protectively over her younger sister, satchel clutched at her side. Garrick dropped to one knee, voice low as cedar smoke. "Nightmare, little one?" he asked, offering a steady hand. Levi's trembling fingers closed around Garrick's calloused palm, seeking refuge in a stranger's strength. Garrick sank beside them, lanterns glowed, dancing across their pale faces. Levi buried her face in the quilt's rose patch, pressing tiny nose to faded bloom. Clara stroked the twins' tangled hair, voice soft as wind and sagebrush. Amos's vigilant gaze swept the room's corners, as a threat lurked behind every plank. Garrick inhaled cedar and fear, memory unraveling. His wife's lullabies humming in the same chamber, blankets stitched with love, cradle rocking beneath a gentle hand. He pressed his thumb to the frozen watch at his belt, a gift long since silent. No ticking soul to mark time's mercy. When dawn's first pale light bled through dusty windows, Garrick led the children to chores. He handed Clara a burlap sack and pointed to the chicken coop, where hens clucked beneath crooked perches. Clara knelt and coaxed each hen from its roost, gathering eggs in a tin pail. Ruth and Rachel followed, silent as deer, offering bright-eyed assistance. Levi lingered by Garrick's leg, toes nudging gravel. Garrick ruffled her hair. "You help Amos today," he said. Amos guided Levi to the water trough, teaching her to steady pail and pour without spilling precious liquid. Each careful drop a lesson in trust. Meanwhile, Garrick and Amos walked the fence line. Sand-dusted rails leaned under yesterday's storm. Amos bent to knot fresh wire around a splintered post, each twist of wire tightening hope's hold. Garrick handed him the hammer, silent pride rippling beneath his stoic exterior. The boy set nails with surprising strength, muscles coiled like steel spring. Garrick watched him work. Once a boy lost in storm, now a sentinel of a fragile home. He tapped the post with final nail, whispering, "Well done," as Amos glanced up, eyes bright with purpose. Back at the barn, Clara tended to the twins. Ruth traced her fingertip across a patch where his wife had embroidered daisies into the quilt's corner. Clara sank to one knee, mirror of Garrick's care, and brushed gravel from their boots. She hummed a lullaby Levi had never known, her own mother's lull. Rachel's wide eyes closed in contentment. Clara's voice wove through barn beams like healing wind, stitching together broken hearts. Garrick paused at the door, lantern raised, heart softening at Clara's gentle hum. Mid-morning brought a knock on the cabin's door. Garrick's jaw clenched as he opened it to find Tom Wells, the storekeeper, burdened with burlap and news. Tom's weathered face spoke of long days behind counters and grit-earned sympathy. He carried sacks of flour, beans, salted pork, and a sealed envelope stamped with Caldwell's seal. "Thought you might need provisions," he said, setting the goods aside. He looked at the children, huddled behind Garrick, and offered a small smile. "They're yours to keep till kin come." He tapped the envelope. "This arrived while I was away." Inside, Garrick laid the supplies across the table. Clara helped unpack, humming gently. Amos peeked at the envelope seal. Suspicion sharpened like arrowheads. Garrick broke the wax with steady nail. Inside lay a terse demand: return the children or face Caldwell's claim on Lone Star Ranch. No signature, just the ranch's brand and the promise of legal ruin by fortnight's end. Garrick pressed the note flat against the table, cedar grain visible beneath creases. He inhaled the cold hush of dawn. "They'll come," Amos said, voice low. Garrick nodded, voice rough as cordite. "Then we face them." He looked at Clara and the children, each trembling in their place. Clara's hand closed over the quilt's rose patch. Ruth and Rachel peeked around her legs, small fists clutching blanket fringe. Levi pressed against Amos's thigh, eyes wide with fear. Garrick knelt before them, whispering a vow he had not dared to speak since his own loss. "Here, your family. No storm, no law, no man will take you from me." Tom Wells lingered by the door, shifting weight from boot to boot. He cleared his throat. "Folks talk," he said. "Caldwell's men ride these parts." He offered Garrick a rough map of trails and outposts. "Use it if you need." Tom tipped his hat and departed into the dawn's first light, leaving echoes of community support in his wake. Garrick folded the map and the letter, slipping them into his coat. He rose, face and resolve forged from grief and hope. That night, Clara tucked the children into their bunks. Amos lay awake, rifle across his chest, eyes reflecting lantern's flame. Clara smoothed Levi's quilt, humming lullabies stitched with her mother's care. Garrick sat in the rocking chair, watch in hand, its hands still frozen. He closed his eyes, reliving a moment by lantern light, when his wife pressed the watch into his palm and whispered promises of laughter-filled halls. He opened his eyes as a soft cry drifted from the twins' bunk. Ruth stumbled to her feet, reaching for his knee. Garrick scooped her up, carrying her to Clara's bunk, tucking her beneath warm quilts. Moonlight sifted through curtains as Garrick walked outside, patrolling the corral. He examined horse tracks pressed in hard earth, 2 sets, deep and wide, and 5 faint prints trailing behind. The kin had come closer. He bent to trace each mark, fingertips brushing gritty edges. He listened to night's hush, only wind and distant owl cry. He straightened, inhaled cedar and fear, and returned inside. In the cabin's lamplight, Garrick gathered Clara, Amos, Levi, Ruth, and Rachel in a circle. Clara held the twins beneath the quilt's rose patch. Amos surveyed the windowsill. Levi clung to Garrick's bootlace. Garrick pressed his palm to the frozen watch over his heart. "No storm, no frontier law will break us," he whispered. Clara met his gaze and nodded, tears shimmering like dew on sage. Ruth and Rachel blinked up through curtain of lashes, hope bright in their small faces. Amos swallowed fear and edged closer. Beyond the window, A lone rider paused on a ridge. A silhouette against moon's pale arc, spurred boots edged closer to the corral gate. Garrick's heart thundered in unison with approaching hoofbeats. He whispered his vow once more, "You're safe with me." The children's breaths wove in anxious chorus. In that charged hush, home's fragile promise trembled on the threshold. Then hooves struck the earth in measured rhythm, and the door's latch clicked ominous in night's pressing silence. Hoofbeats drummed across the dawn-wet corral, echoing off cedar rails like distant thunder. Garrick Hayes tightened his grip on the lantern's handle, spine coiled against the chill. He stepped onto the porch as a rider emerged from sagebrush gloom, dust clinging to leather and brim. Garrick's rifle rested across his forearm, barrel glinting in pale light. The stranger dismounted with measured calm, shoulders squared beneath a threadbare coat. Garrick met him at the door, heart thundering with every step. No man came calling at Lone Star Ranch without meaning. The rider's voice was low as creaking floorboards. "Hayes!" He nodded toward Garrick's watch, its hand still frozen. "Caldwell sent me." The man's eyes flicked to Garrick's bare wedding band, and the quilt tossed across the porch rail. Children belonged to Caldwell's heirs. He demands them returned, where the ranch forfeited. Garrick's jaw clenched. "I found them in the storm," he said, voice rough as chipped granite. "They're under my roof." The rider's lips curled. "You have till sunset. Then we take what's ours." He pressed a folded dispatch into Garrick's palm and remounted without another word. Inside, Garrick closed the door against wind sigh. The rider's threat lingered like frost on wood. Clara stood in the doorway to the living room, satchel at her hip, eyes fierce with protectiveness. Amos hovered behind her, rifle cradled in strong arms, gaze alive with guarded suspicion. Levi and the twins pressed close to the hearth's glow, blankets carpeting the floor in colors of dawn. Garrick swallowed, heart raw with paternal need. "They'll come," Amos said, voice taut. Clara's fist clenched the satchel strap. "Then we stand," she whispered, folding twins' hands into hers. Morning chores became rallying cries. Garrick led Amos and Clara to the shooting range carved from a low ridge beyond the barn. He handed Amos a borrowed pistol, its barrel warm from oil. "Aim for the tin," he said, voice soft as cedar incense. Amos squared his shoulders, each exhale steady. He pulled the trigger. The crack rang like a colt's first whinny, and the tin danced from its perch. Amos let out a breath, feeling power coil in his chest. Garrick nodded once, pride flickering beneath regret's shadow. Clara watched with riveted calm. Twin sisters huddled behind sagebrush, eyes wide. Back at the barn, Clara shepherded Ruth and Rachel through morning chores. She guided twin hands to tangle strands of wire into the fence's broken post, each twist an act of hope. Rachel caught sight of Garrick's watch on the shelf, cracked crystal glinting in lantern light. She reached out, tiny fingers brushing its edge, then drew back with wide-eyed awe. Clara knelt beside her, pressing a gentle hand to her back. "It belonged to my father," Clara said, voice low. "Now it keeps time for all of us." She tucked the twins beneath her arm, whispering safe rhythms into their ears. Levi lingered by the well, buckets swinging against her legs. Garrick joined her, passing a spare pail. "Over the rim," he said, nodding. Dust swirled in sunlit beams, and Levi's small hands trembled as she poured cool water over her palms. She licked a few drops from her fingers, eyes bright with thirsty memory. Garrick watched the water carve rivulets across her skin. Proof of life restored. "You learning fast," he murmured. Levi looked up, shy grin cracking her fear. She dipped the bucket again, steady as hope, pouring life into stone troughs. That afternoon, Garrick retreated to the cabin's back room. The door creaked behind him as he closed against suspicion's knock. He unlatched the locked chest and withdrew a photograph, sepia-toned image of a woman's gentle smile and a child in cradle. His wife and unborn son, frozen in time. He pressed the frozen watch to the photo, memory unspooling. Her hum by lamplight as she rocked for hours, promising love without end. He exhaled sorrow's heavy sigh and closed the chest, slipping the watch into his coat. The children's laughter beyond the door echoed new promise. Late afternoon, Tom Wells rode up in his buckboard, dust trail curling behind wheels. He carried sacks of corn and a leather pouch stamped with Caldwell's seal. Garrick met him by the corral, hand raised in greeting. Tom dismounted, cloak damp with sweat. "Neighbors talk," he said, hefting the sack. "They want word." Caldwell's agent sniffing trails. He held out the pouch. "Found this tacked to the fence post." Garrick took the pouch, tearing it open. Inside lay a final demand: return the children or face violent claim. No signature, only Caldwell's brand. Tom's eyes flicked to Clara and Amos, guarding the gate. "We'll stand together," he said, voice gruff with loyalty. As dusk draped the plains in violet hush, Garrick lit lanterns by each window. He gathered the children in the cabin's single room, nursing cups of warm milk. Clara wrapped the twins in quilts. Amos polished his pistol's barrel with careful strokes. Levi pressed her face to the watch's crystal, fingers coaxing life from broken time. Garrick crossed the floor, placing a rough hand on each child's shoulder. "Tomorrow we defend this home," he said, voice low as husks. "Not just for me, but for us." The children nodded in unified hush, each heart tethered to the rancher's vow. Night deepened as wind sighed through cedar rails. Clara and Amos stood guard by the door, rifles cradled against chests. Levi and Ruth and Rachel nestled beneath a quilt on the floor, eyes heavy but watchful. Garrick paced the porch, scanning moonlit dunes for shapes. Then a lone rider galloped across the ridge, silhouette stark against silver sky. Garrick's hand fell to his sidearm, familiar weight of purpose and protection. The rider slowed at the gate, hat brim low, dust clinging to spurs. Garrick stepped forward, lantern raised. The stranger dismounted, grin flashing beneath moonlight. "Hayes," he called, voice at steel. "This ends now." Garrick's heart thundered in reply as the lantern's glow caught the glint of hired guns behind the rider. Clara stood at his side, satchel strap coiled in her fist. Amos leveled his pistol. Levi pressed 2 blankets to her chest, twins clinging to her skirts. Garrick inhaled cedar and starlight, memory and resolve braided in his chest. He looked to each small face, words raw as lead. "We stand together." The rider spat, stepping back into shadows that rippled with 6 more rifles. Garrick tightened his grip on the watch's pocket. Time paused in promise of dawn. Outside, riders paused in sacred stillness. Thread at the threshold. Clara's pulse echoed in Gredgick's ears as he braced for the standoff that would decide their chosen family's fate. Hoofbeats drummed in the moonlit yard as Garrick Hayes barred the cabin door, each slam of iron against a heartbeat in the night's hush. Rain-slicked riders fanned across the corral, rifles gleaming like specters in lantern glow. Garrick's rifle lay across his forearm, stock worn smooth by sorrow, while Clara knelt behind twin barrels, satchel at her side. Amos crouched by the gate, loading his pistol with steady hands. Levi pressed boards into the window frame, small frame quivering with purpose. The twins huddled at Clara's back, wide-eyed in the lantern's halo. Outside, the hired gun dismounted, spurs tapping muddy earth. He wore Caldwell's crest on his collar, cold eyes sweeping the cabin silhouette. Garrick lifted his lantern, revealing a face carved by regret. He stepped forward, voice low as cedar smoke. "You come for the children?" The man tossed Garrick the court writ. "By lantern light. By sunset, they're gone. Or Lone Star Ranch is ours." He spat the words, then nodded to his riders. 6 more guns aimed like thunderheads above the door. Rain hissed on the roof, carrying their threat on airborne steel. Clara's grip tightened on the satchel strap. Ruth and Rachel nestled against her skirts, clutching quilt's edge. Amos rose, pistol in hand, eyes flicking to Ruth and Rachel. He offered Clara a nod. She lifted the twins into her arms, stepping behind Garrick's broad shoulders. Levi pressed her cheek to Garrick's coat, quilt pressed tight against her chest. Garrick inhaled cold air, memory stirring. His wife's lullabies in this very room. Quilt's rose patch pressed to a newborn's cheek. He exhaled grief's heavy sigh and faced the riders. A long pause stretched between them. Rifles pointed, breath held. Then the hired gun slapped the writ against Garrick's chest. "I have authority," he said. "Sign it, or we enforce the law." Garrick's finger brushed the frozen watch at his belt, its hand still fixed on day's first light. He closed his eyes, recalling the day he filed for the watch, a promise to his unborn son he would return. He opened them, voice low and hard as flint. "This ranch is my home and theirs. I won't sign." The man smiled thin as barbed wire. He drew a pistol from his coat, its barrel black as remorse. "Then we take it." He fired a warning shot through the open doorframe. Splinters rained across the floor. Clara stumbled, twins crying out. Amos fired back, rifle thunder crackling, pinning the riders' heads behind saddlebags. Levi yelled, terror and triumph mingling in her voice as she pounded nails into the window frame. Each hammer strike a lifeline thrown against a storm of weapons. Inside, Garrick seized a man's writ and tossed it onto the hearth. Flames hissed as paper curled. He stepped to the bunkhouse door and unlatched it, revealing Tom Wells and Deputy Price. Lanterns high. Tom carried a crate of extra cartridges and a burlap sack of salted pork. Price bore a county affidavit nullifying Caldwell's claim that the children were proven lawful wards. Their arrival shifted the balance, community's bones reinforcing the cabin's frame. Tom set down the crate with a nod. "We're with you, Garrick." Price's badge glinted in oil lamplight. "Let no man threaten these children." Outside, the hired gun reloaded, pistol clicking in rhythmic menace. Amos took aim again, lean frame carved sharp against Dawn's promise. Clara moved to Levi and the twins, pressing their backs to the wall, voice soft as prayers. "Stay here." Garrick stepped between Clara and the doorway, eyes locked on the riders. In that moment, past and present collided. His own son's first footprints in fresh snow, now these children's prints in mud. He swallowed regret and lifted his rifle to his shoulder. A salvo of rifle fire shattered the night's brittle calm. Timber splintered above Garrick's head. Dust carpeted the floor. Price fired from the loft window, barrel cracking like distant thunder, forcing the riders to duck behind wagon wheels. Tom Baxter joined him. Rifle spitting led into the rising storm of menace. Tom's aim was steady. Price's voice rang clear above gunfire. "Back off." The hired gun cursed and barked orders. But Caldwell's men faltered beneath the cabin's crossfire, uncertainty flickering in their cold eyes. Clara seized a moment to sprint outside, twins tucked beneath her coat. Ruth and Rachel pressed their faces to Garrick's coat as he reached for their hands. Amos covered Clara's retreat with precise shots, each report ripping through the storm's veil. Levi emerged carrying a coil of wire, traps she'd set at Garrick's instruction. She fanned it across the corral gate, ready to close in an instant. The hired gun aimed again, but Price stepped into his line of fire, forcing the man to hesitate. In that breath, Garrick lunged forward, rifle aimed with unwavering purpose. The standoff collapsed into a flurry of action. Caldwell's men abandoned the gate under storm of crossfire, horses stampeding in muddy churn. Amos dropped his pistol and lunged to secure the gate latch. Clara wrapped the twins in the quilt's rose patch, pulling them to safety behind the cabin. Levi hurled the wire trap into the rider's path. A man tripped, rifle skittering across mud. Garrick's aim found the hired gun's holster. A bullet cracked the brim of his hat, knocking it askew. The man stumbled back, eyes wide with shock. Community voices rose in unison as ranch hands and neighbors emerged, lantern-lit figures brandishing rifles and pitchforks, sworn to Garrick's stand. Tom Baxter advanced, voice booming. Not on Lone Star. Caldwell's men broke ranks, fear fracturing their resolve. One raised white flag in trembling hand. Another mounted and spurred away into storm's gray maw. Garrick advanced on the hired gun, rifle lowered but ready. The man spat, then raised his coat's flap. revealing a sealed dispatch from Caldwell rescinding claim if children were returned. Garrick seized the paper and read the final clause. Caldwell renounced all rights in light of their defense. Rain slackened to hiss as riders retreated, boots splashing through soggy ground. Clara exhaled, knees shaking, twins clinging to her skirts. Amos dropped to one knee, hands bloodied from wire. Levi ran to Garrick's side, pressing the quilt's rose patch to his leg. Garrick sank to the muddy ground, arms around each child. The hired gun, beaten and shamefaced, spat again and mounted, disappearing into the dim horizon. Garrick watched his retreat, heart pounding with triumph and relief. Inside, Price and Tom helped Clara tend to wounded rails and broken lanterns. Amos cleaned his rifle by the hearth, each scrape of brush soothing trauma's raw edges. Garrick lit a fresh lamp and knelt by the satchel Clara had carried since the storm. He opened it, revealing a piece of faded embroidery. Clara's mother's calling card, name and address in fading ink. Garrick's breath caught as he traced the letters. "We'll find them," he whispered, touching the fabric. Clara placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, guiding him from past sorrow toward promise's dawn. In the hush after battle, the cabin's walls echoed with quiet breaths. Ruth and Rachel slept in Clara's arms, Levi's eyelids drooping with exhaustion. Amos stood guard by the door, rifle at his side, but eyes softened with relief. Garrick closed the satchel and tucked it into his coat, watch in hand. He pressed the frozen hands against his chest, memory spinning. Wife's laughter by lamplight, cradle's soft creak, promise of family unbroken. He exhaled hope's fragile ember and stood. Beyond the window, rain splashed sagebrush into jeweled droplets. Garrick stepped to the porch rail, leaning on Cedar's cool grain. Clara joined him, twins in tow, Amos at his back. Levi pressed the quilt's rose patch to his palm. Garrick raised his voice into the storm's dying hiss. "This is our home." The children echoed his vow in silent promise, chosen family bound by bloodless ties. Above, clouds parted to reveal moon's pale gaze, blessing the stand they had made against shadow's claim. A sudden crack from the horizon drew their eyes, Caldwell's silhouette galloping away, cloak whipping in wind. Garrick's chest tightened as he whispered to the rising moon, "They'll never take you." Clara set the twins on the rail. Amos clapped hands to Levi's shoulders, and Garrick rested a hand on the satchel's worn leather. In that charged stillness, family, home, and history woven into each heartbeat. They faced the night's end together, hearts coiled with hope for dawn's certain light. Hoofbeats rattled the dawn as Garrick Hayes stepped into the yard, rifle slung and lantern in hand. Moonlight faded to pale gold, revealing shattered rails and shattered nerves. Clara knelt by Ruth and Rachel's blanket, soothing trembling forms beneath the quilt's rose patch. Amos polished his pistol's barrel with deliberate strokes, eyes cold with promise. Levi carried water to the trough, each step a testament to defiance. Garrick exhaled cedar smoke and sorrow, memory and hope braided in his chest. Caldwell's hired gun reappeared on the ridge, silhouette tense against clearing skies. Garrick raised his rifle, voice low as driftwood. "This is our ground." The man spat and called forth his riders, 6 rifles trained on Lone Star's battered walls. Their leader, Caldwell's kin, rode forward, coattails flicking sagebrush. Garrick's heart thundered, debt unpaid, promises broken. He drew a deep breath and looked to his chosen family. Clara's tall frame squared, Amos's rifle aimed, Levi's small hand clenched around Quilt's hem. A single shot cracked. Amos's bullet chipped cedar rail where the rider had stood. Dust exploded like distant thunder. Clara ducked behind twin barrels, satchel clasped tight. Levi pressed butter-churned paddle against her palm, eyes bright with purpose. Garrick advanced, rifle raised, lantern light casting shadows across granite features. "Your threat ends," he said, stepping to meet Caldwell's kin. The rider snarled, raising his pistol. Before he fired, Tom Wells and Deputy Price emerged from Barnes Lee, brandishing affidavits and 6 lanterns, community's backbone in legal armor. Tom's voice rang. Caldwell's claim is void. County court nullified all debts above 5 years. The rider's eyes flicked to the affidavits, disbelief warping his sneer. Price leveled his shotgun barrel. No man rides these parts under false claim. The hired gun's pistol wavered. His cavalry stance cracked. Clara rose, stepping into the golden haze, satchel open to reveal a faded document. Clara's mother's letter naming Lone Star Ranch as sanctuary. Ruth and Rachel peeked from Clara's skirts, trust blooming on their small faces. Caldwell's kin cursed and lowered his pistol. Amos snapped the rider's barrel aim with a final warning. Levi rattled the paddle against stock. Twins' laughter echoing like wind chimes. Garrick nodded to Price. Let them ride. The rider spat and mounted, spurs splashing dew-crusted grass as his men followed into dawn's amber. Garrick exhaled, relief surging through scars of loss. He lowered his rifle and crossed to his children. Clara embraced Twins, quilt wrapped like armor. Amos holstered his pistol, shoulders uncoiling with boy's weight. Levi dashed to Garrick, hand pressing the quilt's rose patch against his leg. Garrick knelt, pressing the frozen watch from his pocket. He opened its cracked face and let its hands settle on sunrise. Clara placed her hand over his, guiding time's broken promise back to life. Garrick pressed watch to his heart, voice thick as grain. Here, time holds us safe. Community support flourished next. Neighbors arrived with nails, wire, and fresh provisions. Tom delivered barrels of clean water. Price secured legal documents under the sheriff's seal. Under Garrick's direction, fences were reforged, windows replaced, lanterns hung in steady rows. Clara led the twins in fresh chores, feeding calves, gathering wildflowers. Her voice a quiet anthem of renewal. Amos tracked hoofprints at dawn, rifle over shoulder but eyes softened by sunrise. Levi painted daisies on fence posts, each bloom a fragile promise of growth. At noon, Garrick gathered the children under the lone oak he had planted when they first arrived, a sapling now grown into slender strength. He handed each a ribbon cut from the quilt's rose patch. Tie this to your satchels, he said, voice gentle as breeze through cedar. Ruth and Rachel did so, their small fingers knotting cloth with hope. Amos tied his ribbon with firm resolve. Clara looped hers around Levi's bucket handle. Levi pressed her ribbon to her chest, cheeks flushed with newfound courage. Garrick knelt beneath the oak's budding leaves, hand pressed to its trunk. He drew a small sapling from his coat pocket. His wife's final gift, seeds he carried for years and forgotten. He pressed them into the earth, Lena's watch placed beside the saplings. Clara sprinkled water from Levi's bucket. Amos laid stones around the base, twins patting soil over seeds. Garrick covered his face with calloused palm and whispered his vow. For family, for future, for those we save. 1 year later, sunrise draped Lone Star Ranch in honey promise. Cedar fences gleamed repaired. Wildflowers cascaded across furrows. Amos rode a young colt, laughter trailing like whippoorwill song. Clara guided Ruth and Rachel toward the barn, teaching them to fill feed sacks with grain. Levi chased butterflies along the fence line, quilt's rose patch fluttering at her hips. Garrick stood on the porch, lantern replaced by clear morning light, watch in hand, its hands now tracing time's greeting. Inside, the cabin glowed with warmth. Quilts of patched memories lined every bunk. Satchels hung by the hearth, names stitched in Clara's careful hand. Garrick entered with 2 mugs of fresh coffee, offering one to Tom Wells, now a frequent visitor and friend. Price tipped his hat in the doorway, badge shining like hope. They shared quiet smiles, testament to bonds forged in crisis. Under the oak, now a sturdy tree, Garrick and the children carved their initials, G.C., A.L.R.R., in heart-shaped bark. Clara pressed her palm to the carved letters, tears bright as morning dew. Amos leaned in to press his name beside hers, pride softening his features. Levi traced a rose-patch ribbon beneath their names. Twins touched each other's initials with chubby fingers. Garrick knelt and brushed each letter with a hand steady as sunrise. They stepped back, silhouettes against fields of swaying gold. Garrick lifted Levi onto his shoulders. Clara looped her arm through his. Amos rested a hand on Garrick's broad shoulder. The oak's leaves whispered in dawn's breeze, a silent witness to chosen families sealed in wood and memory. Beyond, cattle grazed beneath the wide frontier sky, a living hymn of resilience. Garrick inhaled sage-sweet air, heart full at last. He was no longer alone. The watch ticked softly in his pocket, and the quilt's rose patch stirred in morning light. A promise kept, time reclaimed, and love's quiet victory over loss.